Gen TV. Today we have with us Matt Sigelman, CEO of Burning Glass. Matt, welcome.
Thank you, George. It's so great to be with you today. This year has brought a growing amount of focus and I think real sincerity in the corporate world to understanding how we can really move the needle in terms of building greater equity in the workforce. And yet, despite a lot of years of effort, a lot of sincerity, we also know that most initiatives don't necessarily live up to their ambitions. So why did corporate diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives stall out? One reason is that executives traditionally haven't had the data to benchmark themselves or to uncover disparities. The advent of big data allows corporate leaders to have detailed, actionable data on where roadblocks to progress lie in their organizations and how to move forward. I'm so glad to be joined today with Jean Martin, the Global Head of Product at Mercer, and looking forward very much to this conversation.
Thanks, Matt. It's great to be with you all today, and particularly excited by the topic. I think in the area of diversity and inclusion, the old adage, what gets measured gets done, is particularly important. And as you mentioned, Matt, I think the concept of what data will power progress in this area is front and center for so many of our clients. So I'd love to engage both of our thinking along this line. And I know one of the key questions that we've been looking at Mercer, and I know you've been looking at Burning Glass, is what should we be measuring in this area, and how to focus our work. And I don't know, Matt, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, exactly. Let's dive in right there. I mean, as you said, what gets measured gets done. What is it that we should be measuring?
Yeah, for Mercer, one of the most interesting things we're finding is that gender pay equity and diversity inclusion metrics are really giving way to a whole new set of insights and workforce analytics, what we call the move from gender and pay equity to career equity. So one of the things that we think is most critical in getting under diversity inclusion issues is understanding the internal labor market dynamics within an organization. And what's been popping out in our research is that there are essentially three flows within an organization: the degree to which the hiring pool is diverse, the degree to which the promotion rate or lateral movements within the career path are supported and ample and all diverse metrics, and then the degree to which the leaving rate is balanced across groups. And what we're finding is by companies really pioneering maps that look at the movement of the internal labor market, starting with descriptive analysis and then moving into actual causal analysis of what are the barriers, what are the imbalances. We've really made progress in thinking about how to remove that real glass ceiling wherever it appears and in whichever of those flows it is encountered. So very excited by that and eager to see if we can, through this new data lens, really drive a whole new level of change and management beyond just a vocal or spirited commitment to actual action. What are you finding, Matt?
Well, Jean, first of all, I think you brought up a couple of really important points there, and I think in particular the importance of looking beyond traditional metrics and to asking important questions about why we measure it all. I know that may sound kind of a little odd. Of course, we want to measure things, but the question is, what are we trying to achieve? You don't want to be the fireman who's documenting the fire. You want metrics that enable you to put it out. And so, first of all, so as we're trying to think about the objectives for DEI measurement, I think we need to think about three core areas. One, how do we set goals? Two, how do we highlight disparities that require attention? And three, how do we mark the progress that we're making and see where we need to accelerate? In terms of setting goals, for goals to be actionable, they need to be more than just aspirations. They need to be grounded in data. One of the things that we often see happening is that companies wind up falling into the trap of either setting themselves goals that are too broad or too narrow. You see a lot of aspirational thinking, and those aspirations are exactly are the right aspirations, right? Saying that we want each of our talent pools to represent the communities they serve is it's an important aspiration, and it's an important long-term goal. But if you're looking for talent in a talent pool where, for example, actuaries are the whitest job in America, only 5% of actuaries are Black or Latinx. If you're looking for diverse actuaries, setting yourself a goal of having them represent the roughly 40% of America that's Black or Latinx is a good aspiration, but it's going to be hard to achieve. And so instead, how do you be able to understand what is within the right range of achievability so that you can move forward? From a disparity perspective, and I think you touched on this, Gene, one of the most startling things that we see in our data is that companies actually wind up often having these really wide disparities across different talent pools and different levels of the organization. And you need to be able to identify those. You need to be able to identify them so that you can highlight them, so that you can call them out, so that you can shine a light on the best practices around an organization so you can focus attention on trouble spots. And you need to be able to mark progress. And if you're going to mark progress, that means that this can't be the kind of once and done or maybe the annual diversity audit kind of cadence that we're used to thinking about. Instead, there needs to be a frequency, an ongoing frequency. These need to be actually connected to a range of systems so that in real time you have that kind of access. Ultimately, then the kinds of data that you have become very important. And I would say that therefore the data that we bring to the table from a metrics perspective need to be, number one, granular. They need to be benchmarked, and they need to be visible. Granularity is something that we're not used to when it comes to the world of DEI data. We tend to think in terms of company-wide metrics and company-wide ambitions, but those don't tell you enough, right? In fact, the fact that the average temperature on Earth is, I think, 72 degrees doesn't really tell me what I should be wearing today. It's, by the way, a lot lower than 72 degrees today in Boston. 46% of Amazon's workforce is Black or Latinx, but their data scientists are only 2 or 3%. Knowing that tells you where to focus your attention. From a benchmark perspective, the key to good goal setting is having a basis for understanding what's achievable. You need to be able to benchmark at the role level, at the function level, at the location level. And if you're going to have urgency and legitimacy, you also have to do that at the specific level of specific peers. And you got to be ready to name names, right? Saying one thing, hey, look, we're this much less than industry average, doesn't carry a lot of weight inside the organization. Saying that, hey, our competitor is doing a lot better than we are, can really be motivating. It's too easy to write yourself a hall pass if you don't have specificity. So I talked before about like, hey, you want to have these kind of broad ambitions, which are good, but that doesn't give you an action step. But the reverse can also be true. A lot of companies say, well, we're a tech company and it's hard to find diverse tech talent. If you look at the FANGs, for example, most of their software developers are like 4 or 5% Black or Latinx. But there are some Fortune 50 companies whose software developers are close to 30% Black or Latinx. Having that kind of benchmark can really stretch your thinking.
Yeah, I think it's such a great point, Matt, the granularity and the precision of the data in drilling into the right priority actions. And I know for a lot of companies out there, one of the questions they have is, how do I broaden the talent pool? Like, how do I take the right interventions in the right way to get after improvements here once I can see some of those disparities? What are your thoughts on that, Matt? Yeah.
Gene, I loved so much of what you described there. The idea of skill and role adjacencies is so powerful precisely because it gives us something that we can do about all this.
Yeah.
I often feel, when it comes to the world of DEI, that, we often think we're really solving two problems. A social imperative to grow diversity and inclusion in the workforce, and a commercial problem of filling roles. But I think when we can understand how jobs relate to one another, how roles relate to each other, the work that Burning Glass does, that Mercer does, of mapping roles to skills, and create that kind of genetic map of the workplace, suddenly you're solving not two problems, you're solving one problem. Because the ability to generate talent into roles and the ability to move people up and create escalators for mobility are one and the same. I want to close off by asking you this. We've been talking a lot about building diversity within the organization, but want to turn our attention to the question of inclusion. It's often commented that diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. We know that in a lot of workplaces, there's a lot of efforts at bringing people in, but people don't feel included, leave pretty quickly. Talk to me about how you think data can help to build inclusivity within the workplace.
Yeah, it's such an interesting question, isn't it, Matt? And I love your focus on that, because just as we've seen that progress in thinking new ways about diversity and representation, we're also realizing, okay, like you said, some studies suggest the real return for human potential only comes after inclusion, after fully being involved in the work, respected and allowed to contribute. So one of the things we're seeing clients start to investigate is, how can I get metrics around inclusive behaviors and around degrees of inclusion? So there's been some interesting work done, for example, with Microsoft Outlook, to understand through objective technology analysis, technology-based analysis, how diverse are meetings? How do we actually understand whether the meeting as a starting point is inclusive? Then I even have a company that's been working with the idea of, could we create a kind of Alexa tool that empowers the group by speaking out if, say, only the men in the room are speaking, or saying, I believe that particular person's voice has not been heard, by brokering through objective technologies and measuring literally the contributions to work interactions on a much more clear and precise basis. And technology makes that possible for the first time. I really feel we're at the dawn of a very new form of inclusive workforce. And very interestingly, final point is the flex work environment of remote work has actually also added an analytic advantage, because we can track Zoom meetings, we can track who's spoken, we can do chats that encourage people to come in a way that goes beyond some of the more formal barriers in the workplace. What are you seeing, Matt, in that area?
Well, Gina, I love your focus on inclusive behaviors, and specifically on bringing data to bear in getting to precision about what moves the needle. I think when it comes to inclusivity, to date, most analysis is really focused on engagement surveys, but engagement surveys are important, but not necessarily sufficient. You get only a limited subset of people who are actually responding, and all the sort of questions that come around that. We recently launched a platform for data-driven DEI, which we call DEI Insight, which brings together benchmarks and goal setting and data on how to expand the talent pool. And a big part of what we do is also bring benchmarks to bear around key metrics like retention and mobility. Those are metrics that tend not to get focused on enough. And when it comes to inclusivity, there's an argument that says that proof's in the pudding. If you've got groups within your company who are not staying as long as others, then sort of by definition, you have an inclusivity problem. And so we're finding that ability to, first of all, get granular, as we were talking about before, about rates of retention, to get granular about rates of mobility, to track those kinds of alternative metrics. For example, we're finding some companies where, again, even within the same sector, if you were to look at Fortune 100 tech companies, you would see a really wide array of retention rates overall. And in some companies, the retention rates are actually positive for diverse groups. That is to say, they tend to stay longer, move up faster. And in some companies, you see the reverse. Knowing where you stand on that, being able to benchmark yourself against peers and be able to do it at the level of specific roles, specific functions in specific locations is really powerful, because it allows you to understand where the problems are. Overall, maybe we're doing fine, but in our marketing group, we find that that Latinx talent is leaving fairly quickly. When you can put your finger on that, get the finger on the pulse of what's actually bearing out in the workforce, you can really move the needle. Gina, I've so enjoyed this conversation.
Definitely. Pleasure, Matt.
I think, as you said before, this is a exciting time. We're at the dawn of some big changes. The thing which, to me, I take away from this conversation is that this isn't just a problem to be managed. This is not just something where we can have the right ambitions but feel helpless to actually accomplish them. Increasingly, data, through the work that you're doing at Mercer, through the work that we're doing at Burning Glass, are enabling companies to make real progress, and couldn't be more excited.
Yeah, I feel the same, Matt. Thanks for the opportunity to exchange with you on this, and completely agree. What gets measured gets done. What gets measured gets heard. And I think the diversity and inclusion agenda is really on a new precipice of absolute progress. So excited to see where that goes from here.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.